Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mary McGuire, Director of Public and Government Affairs at AAA Northeast. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, and welcome to our AAA Town Hall and to Congresswoman Lori Trahan, who has represented Massachusetts' 3rd District since 2018. Congresswoman Trahan grew up in a working-class family in Lowell, earning a scholarship to play Division I volleyball at Georgetown University and becoming the first in her family to graduate from college. She worked for 10 years for Congressman Marty Meehan, moved to a tech company as the only female executive there, and co-founded a women-owned business and operated consulting firm. Serving her 2nd term in Congress, Representative Trahan sits on the House Committee on Energy and Commerce, and discussions of both energy and business issues will be part of our conversation today. Representative Trahan was kind enough to headline our AAA Transportation Funding Summit in Norwood, Mass. In 2019, and she's back with us today to discuss issues related to transportation, the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, and economic recovery from the pandemic. Thanks so much for being with us today, Representative, and great to see you once again.
Oh, it's great to see you, and thank you, Mary, for having me.
Well, it's really a pleasure to have you as our special guest today. And I know you have some opening remarks that you'd like to share with us this afternoon. So I invite our audience to type any questions you might have during this conversation into the chat. And Congresswoman, the floor is yours.
Oh, terrific. Well, I so appreciate being here, joining you and AAA today to talk about the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And of course, I want to thank everyone who took the time to join us this afternoon. This bipartisan law proves that our government can work, that we can still solve massive problems. The bill itself is massive, nearly $1 trillion in total, including roughly $500 billion in new spending. It funds a myriad of programs from roads and bridges to clean water and broadband. And some of these funds are distributed via formula to states, and some are competitive grant programs. But here's just some of what we can expect over the coming years as funding is distributed. Massachusetts is slated to receive at least $4.2 billion for road improvements and another $1.1 billion for bridge replacements and repairs over the next 5 years. Last month, the Federal Highway Administration announced the tranche of funding for 2022, $804 million, that can be used for a number of purposes, including highway performance improvements, bridge repairs, and expanding pedestrian and bicyclist infrastructure. Another $1.1 billion over the next half decade to improve our water infrastructure in communities across the Commonwealth. No less than $2.5 billion to improve our public transportation options, and at least another $100 million to help provide broadband coverage across the state, including providing access to at least 137,000 Bay Staters who currently lack it. These amounts are easier to estimate because we can do so using existing formulas. For example, through the Bridge Formula program, the Department of Transportation will provide a set amount of funds to Massachusetts STIP for pre-approved projects. However, there are also a number of other programs like the Bridge Investment Program that will provide billions in funding nationwide through competitive grants. That's why when we talk about the Commonwealth's $9 billion allocation from the bipartisan infrastructure law, that's really just the floor. The bill also authorizes substantial funding, $1.4 billion, to finally fix CSOs. Now, EPA has already started distributing water infrastructure funds, which we can use to fix CSOs, replace lead pipes, and clean up PFAS. In 2022, EPA announced it will provide Massachusetts State Revolving Fund with $188 million to do this, and we can expect to continue receiving funding at this level through 2026. In addition to the programs you're familiar with, like roads and bridges, there is funding for programs that have received less attention, but are still significant opportunities for funding, like cybersecurity, vehicle safety, and safe routes to school. The point is, we have a tremendous opportunity in front of us to work together to maximize the impact of the infrastructure law for our communities. Right now, my team and I are working with our partners at the state and local levels of government, as well as nonprofits, to identify projects that are eligible through the many programs in the law and best position them to receive this funding. Of course, I could talk all day about what's in the bipartisan infrastructure law, but I'd much prefer to hear from you and take your questions. So I will turn it back to you, Mary, so that we can get started.
Thanks so much, Congresswoman Trahan, for those remarks. So before we dive into the impact of the infrastructure bill on your district and the Commonwealth at large, can we first talk a bit about your hopes for the Build Back Better bill? President Biden and Speaker Pelosi have said that pieces of the bill are still very viable, and Leader Hoyer is predicting that a significant version of Build Back Better will pass this year. Do you agree with that? And if so, what are your priority provisions and what are you working to get passed?
Yeah, no, I'm so glad you brought up Build Back Better. That was one of the most important votes I've taken in my short time in Congress. The bill will increase access to health care. It's going to reduce the cost of prescription drugs, invest in our workforce, provide seniors and their families with home and community-based care, ensure that families have access to child care, affordable and accessible, and finally make a historic investment in combating climate change and protecting our planet finally. I'm disappointed, of course, that the bill is currently stuck in the Senate. However, I think we're all heartened to see that President Biden indicated a likelihood that Build Back Better will be slimmed down so we can get as much as possible of this historic and long overdue package across the finish line. So I remain immensely proud of the bill that we passed in the House because I know how great an impact it will have on our families and our communities across the country and of course across Massachusetts. However, I'm also realistic. I know that we need the vote of every Democratic senator so long as Republicans continue obstructing this type of progress. So it's why we'll continue working with my colleagues in Congress to draft a version that we can all agree on and ultimately pass.
Well, we wish you luck with that. We know you'll be working hard with your colleagues on that. So speaking of Build Back Better, what has the impact of the ongoing pandemic been on your district, on the business community, for example? And how do you build back better from the impact of the pandemic on the 3rd District? I know you are also a co-founder of the Pandemic Preparedness Caucus, looking toward the future on this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's hard to overstate the impact of the pandemic. I mean, countless small businesses have closed. Parents have been asked at numerous points to straddle the roles of teachers, caregivers, and their normal jobs. Our hospitals, wow, have struggled to keep up with high caseloads and surge after surge. I mean, the list goes on, right? These experiences reinforce why Build Back Better is so critical. You know, for example, in Massachusetts, families on average pay nearly $20,000 for childcare for one toddler. Less than 1 in 5 3- and 4-year-olds throughout the state have access to public preschool, which otherwise costs $8,600 per year for a private option. I mean, just the lack of affordable childcare and early education options has made it difficult for working parents, especially working moms, to return to the workforce in full, contributing to over 18% gender gap in workforce participation between moms and dads in the Commonwealth. So as written, Build Back Better would limit child care costs to no more than 7% of income for families earning up to 250% of state median income, establish universal preschool for all 3- and 4-year-olds, expanding access to free, high-quality pre-K for more than 6 million children. And it would extend the American Rescue Plan's wildly successful expanded child tax credit through 2022, ensuring that 665,000 Massachusetts families receive those payments that have overwhelmingly been used for childcare, school expenses, food, and other necessities. But that's just one portion of a $2 trillion bill. There's also $20 billion in funding for workforce development through apprenticeships and on-the-job training, and another $150 billion for home and community-based services, which will free up family caregivers to return to the workforce. So look, it's really a no-brainer. One of the single most important steps Congress can take to alleviate and reverse the damage of this pandemic and the impact that it's had on our local communities is to pass a version of Build Back Better.
So I do want to ask you about the Pandemic Preparedness Caucus, which you helped found with several colleagues. What is the idea behind that, and what are your goals? What are you looking to do?
Yeah, well, thank you for bringing up the Pandemic Preparedness Caucus. You know, back in March of 2020, I think I was as appalled as everybody to see that you know, our frontline workers didn't have the equipment, the PPP that they needed to administer care and to save lives of so many in our community. And that was just the first example of how we were caught flat-footed by this pandemic. So we started the bipartisan pandemic preparedness caucus. I did it with Troy Balderson, and it really has caught fire, bringing in experts, bringing in speakers so that we, you know, we wring out the lessons, and we don't wait, you know, 2 or 3 years to do that. We do that right now, because I think that as this pandemic has showed us, we have had to make serious adjustments along the way. And so wringing out the lessons of what we can do better has a direct impact on how we respond to the pandemic that we're living in, but it is also going to help us in future public health crises. So I will say that, you know, we can see, you know, sort of the fingerprints of our work with the president's testing plan and giving free tests to families across our country, right? All you have to do is go to covidtest.gov and you can sign up and get 4 free tests mailed directly to your door. I was a huge proponent of masks for all, right? Making sure that every family has access, a free access to a high quality mask, whether that's an N95 or a KN95, so that they can protect their families. Ensuring that we have workforce, you know, pipeline measures in place. We know that our frontline workers, they've had to overcome so much these last 2 years just to show up to work day in and day out. That has taken an enormous toll on them, on their wellness, on their mental health. Many people have left the profession. We need to make sure that we have a robust pipeline of people who want to go into infectious disease fields and into our physician and our nursing fields. And so that's another thing that we've worked on. But it doesn't stop there. It's whether we're talking about the strategic national stockpile, genomics research, and our ability for surveillance so that we can know when the next variant is coming very quickly and respond. I think about unbelievable things that we were all trained now to monitor just because of Boston's unbelievable job at looking at wastewater. Every city should have the ability to see sort of what's coming so that we can adequately prepare. And so those are just some of the examples that we're working on in the Pandemic Preparedness Caucus, so that we bolster and strengthen our public health infrastructure, and we also make the investments necessary so that, you know, we're never caught flat-footed again.
Well, it certainly sounds very timely, because I think I'm already hearing reporting on dozens of countries who are seeing possibly a new variant of Omicron. So good luck to you with your work on the caucus. I do want to move to infrastructure and congratulate you and your colleagues on passage of the Bipartisan Infrastructure and Jobs Act for Massachusetts. As you have already said here this afternoon, we're talking about more than $4.2 billion to fund roadway and bridge repairs, $3 billion over 5 years for public transit, $1.4 billion for combined sewage overflow, which you just mentioned, and $100 million to upgrade broadband. So what does this mean for your district, Congresswoman, and for the Commonwealth as a whole? And do you have any updates on the Rourke Bridge in Lowell, which certainly has been the focus of recent safety concerns?
Well, thank you. It's very top of mind. I talk about the Rourke Bridge all the time, but let me start with, you know, passing the bipartisan infrastructure law means that Congress has finally kept its promise to the American people of investing in our crumbling infrastructure. You know, we've talked about this over and over again. Every single president has tried to get this done, and it's kudos to the Biden administration for finally getting it over the line. In addition to safety, reducing gridlock, increasing our reliance on green forms of transportation, this level of investment also means substantial job creation, especially in construction, often for our union workers. So these investments will be key in addressing the 472 bridges and the nearly 1,200 miles of highway in Massachusetts that are currently in poor condition, as well as reducing commute times, which have risen nearly 11% over the past decade. So you mentioned the Rourke Bridge, and that is a perfect example of just how important it was to pass this law. You know, I remember when this bill when this bridge was first built as a temporary bridge right in my neighborhood nearly 4 decades ago. I was 10 years old, and I've driven across it countless times. I've run across it as training for marathons, and I know that caged walkway all too well. I mean, as anyone who has ever crossed the Rourke Bridge knows, it's not a pleasant experience, whether at night in a storm when the bridge is creaking, or when traffic stops because an ambulance is rushing past you in the other direction. I mean, it's only 2 lanes. So frankly, every time I cross, there's a little part of me that's concerned, and I'm not alone there. Just the other week, a steel plate severely damaged a car as it drove north along the bridge. And fortunately, the driver was uninjured, but this only demonstrates the urgent need to finally replace the Rourke Bridge. With roughly 27,000 vehicles crossing that bridge each day, a single accident is too many. So as I mentioned before, there's $27.5 billion in formula funding in the infrastructure package to repair and replace bridges. And of these funds, Massachusetts will automatically receive $1.1 billion. But again, this is just the floor. The law also includes an additional $12.5 billion that states could apply for in a competitive grant funding way. And already the U.S. Department of Transportation distributed $225.3 million to our state in formula funding for 2022 to start on fixing our bridges. So with costs estimated to be nearly $169 million to rebuild, we will need these funds in order to build a new 4-lane bridge finally. However, to be eligible for these funds, bridges must be on the State Transportation Improvement Program. You all know better than I. It's called STIP, and it's a list of projects that Mass DOT assembles each year. Currently, the Rourke Bridge is not on this list, and that is why I've been working around the clock with my colleagues and on the state and the local level and in the business community as well to ensure that the Rourke Bridge is added to the STIP as quickly as possible. So I plan on being involved, very much involved in the replacement of the Rourke Bridge every step of the way, and I plan to keep folks updated on the progress we make.
And I know folks appreciate that. I know there have been calls for an emergency inspection of the bridge. Is that something that you see in the pipeline?
Yeah, I do think that there's been letters, that have come both to, the governor and to me, and also to the state delegation, so that the Mass Department of Transportation can, basically allay fears, right? I mean, I think that's what everyone wants to hear, is that is the bridge safe for me to drive over? And so having Mass DOT come and give that assurance to the community is priority one. And then also understanding the timeline. Some of the studies I've already done, there's already been resources put into the replacement of this bridge, and anything that we can do to accelerate, the replacement of this bridge is what we're going to be working on.
So speaking of the Rourke Bridge, I've seen a long list of infrastructure projects identified in your district, everything from bridges in Haverhill and Fitchburg to roads in Acton and Gardner, the VFW highway, and more. Which transportation projects should be prioritized in Massachusetts, do you think? And what is most important to you and your 3rd district constituents? And I'm also curious whether safety, given the conversation we just had about the Rourke Bridge, is the barometer that you use.
Well, there's no question. Safety is always the top priority for any infrastructure project. I mean, to me, one accident is too many, especially if it could have been prevented by investing and not deferring, our maintenance of our infrastructure. I mean, safety alone explains why we need to replace, the Rourke Bridge. Another top priority is replacing the Basileir Bridge in Haverhill. The bridge is old. The state has already listed Basileir Bridge as structurally deficient, and the city can no longer send its ladder truck at the Water Street Fire Station across the bridge because of weight restrictions. So this delays response times to Bradford, and it just makes our community less safe. Now, fortunately, the Basileir Bridge is programmed on the STIP, which will ensure it receives federal support, and it is sure to be, as you can imagine, expensive as well. Additionally, the bill also authorizes $1.4 billion to finally fix CSOs, and my team and I will work with state and federal partners to make sure we fix the CSOs in Lawrence, Lowell, and throughout the district, as well as, it's so important because New Hampshire as well. We have to go upstream and all the way downstream if we're going to solve the pollution that's currently in the Merrimack River. We'll also make sure that EPA funding in the bill is used to help clean up PFAS in communities like Hudson, Stowe, Devens, Air, and Shirley. So these are just some of my top priorities to bring this funding home and make a real impact. And as I mentioned, my team's in the process of working with our partners, our state reps and senators, mayors, town managers, nonprofit leaders to identify every project possible that's eligible for funding through the formula money coming to Massachusetts or through many of the competitive grant programs. Some of them we already know. They're very well understood and they've been on our list of priorities. You know, one of the first things I did when I was seated in Congress was I went on an infrastructure tour of our district. So ensuring that, you know, we have a comprehensive list that we're constantly communicating with our state and local partners is really important as we navigate all the many programs that are going to be available as funding sources.
So you've really segued right to my next question, which is about the competitive grants. Have you identified all of the competitive grants that might be important and beneficial to your district at this point? And what is the process for obtaining those grants?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And there are dozens of competitive grants. I mean, one of these programs that I'm most excited about is the Safe Streets and Roads for All. This is a new $5 billion competitive grant through the Department of Transportation, that will provide funding directly to and exclusively for local governments to support their efforts to advance Vision Zero plans and other complete street improvements to reduce crashes and fatalities. This will be especially important for cyclists and pedestrians as we'll be able to build rotaries and expand sidewalks as well as bike lanes. And this isn't just, you know, for our gateway cities, right? I mean, this is hugely important. I was just out in Bolton today, where, you know, a combination of replacing a culvert and a Mass Works grant to put in a rotary is going to unbelievably improve the quality of life for our kids getting to school, for people getting to work at a major intersection in that small town of only 5,600 people. So that is what's really exciting, I think, as we think about these competitive grants. So I will say applications for this program, the one I mentioned, Smart Streets, will open in May. And I'm working with towns across the district to make sure they're positioned as best as possible to secure not just funds through this program, but that they understand all the programs that are available.
So I'm so glad you brought up safety, Congresswoman Trahan, because as you know, we're all about traffic safety and AAA public affairs. And the roadway fatality numbers for 2021 in Massachusetts were recently released, and they are unfortunately pretty dismal. The number of deaths on Bay State roadways soared in 2021 from 328 in 2020 to 415 deaths in 2021. Seatbelt use in the Commonwealth is down 4%, which is not helping at all. And I think this really constitutes a serious public health issue. So how can the infrastructure funding be best used to stem this tide of rising injuries and deaths on our roadways? And you already talked a little bit about bike, motorcycle, and pedestrian safety with regard to safe streets.
Yeah, no, that's a really important question. And you know, I mentioned the safe streets and roads for all. That is just one way that local communities can apply for funding to improve roadways and certainly make them safer for everyone. The law also includes $15.6 billion for the Highway Safety Improvement Program, which aims to achieve a significant reduction in traffic fatalities and serious injuries on all public roads. There's another $1.2 billion to improve safety at railroad crossings and $13.2 billion to reduce traffic congestion, which will certainly reduce car accidents. Other programs that, you know, are worth mentioning, the Motor Carrier Safety Assistance Program grants. It's $2.4 billion. That provides financial assistance to states to reduce the number and severity of crashes and hazardous materials incidents involving commercial motor vehicles. And the Highway Safety Program grants, $1.99 billion. These will provide grants to states to improve driver behavior and reduce deaths and injuries from motor vehicle related crashes. So grant funds can be used for programs to reduce drug and alcohol impaired driving, improve pedestrian and bicycle safety, encourage seatbelt use, and so many other of the examples that you just used. So really, And I was with Secretary Buttigieg not long ago, where, this is where it's nice to have a mayor, a former mayor, as head of the Department of Transportation, because he understands that municipalities do not have the resources to navigate all of these different programs. And, states do, of course, but cities and towns especially are not equipped. And so he's working to streamline this process, having a common app so that municipalities can have a more streamlined approach to the many different programs that they may be looking for funding from, and also giving guidance quickly and directly to our municipalities so that they don't miss an opportunity to make these investments to improve safety in our communities. So really excited in terms of being a conduit between the U.S. Department of Transportation, of course, Mass DOT, but also with our communities as they embark on applying for these fabulous programs.
Well, we'd certainly love to work with you on encouraging more seatbelt use, which you mentioned. So that's terrific to hear. How are you prioritizing transportation equity when it comes to distribution of funds throughout your district, as well as in your request for competitive grants? Many in your district, for example, depend on transit. Where do you stand on free transit? It's really a pretty active conversation in Massachusetts right now.
It sure is. This infrastructure package represents really a once-in-a-generation opportunity to correct historic injustices that have been taken for granted for far too long. I mean, for example, the bill includes $1 billion for a competitive grant program to reconnect communities that were, communities divided by transportation infrastructure, particularly historically disadvantaged communities, too often nearly destroyed or cut in half by a highway. I think on the transit portion of your question, many of the folks tuning in may be aware that the Merrimack Valley Regional Transit Authority recently announced a 2-year pilot program where buses on fixed local routes would be able to, would be free to ride starting in March. The pilot is an expansion of a City of Lawrence effort where the city covered fares on 3 local routes in Lawrence since September 2019. And this is a game changer for folks across the region who rely on public transit for their commutes. And in my opinion, it's an outstanding use of federal relief funding that will help families struggling to get back on their feet from the pandemic, to get to work, to get to the grocery store, and to get their kids to school. So ultimately, the infrastructure law includes $2.5 billion to improve public transportation options in Massachusetts alone. And again, that's just the formula funding. That amount alone, however, will be key to addressing the commute time disparity that currently, sees Bay Staters who rely on public transit spend an extra 53% of their time commuting, an issue that particularly impacts individuals of color who are twice as likely to commute via public transit. So I'm so happy that the law as written covers equity, and really looking forward to seeing our regional transit authorities be transformed by this level of investment.
I think many certainly are looking forward to the same thing. So we are closing in on the hour, but I can't let you go without asking you this question on behalf of working parents everywhere, including myself, and you had referenced women in the workforce earlier in our conversation. You are a Congresswoman with 5 children. How do you juggle the challenging career of being a congressperson with the demands of 5 kids? And I also see a dog behind you who's been amazingly quiet during this conversation. What advice do you have for parents, especially during the pandemic?
I think we've all sort of gone through a transition. Some of it's been really good, I have to say. I've had to simplify a lot of things during the last 2 years in terms of what I can focus on, what we can handle sort of as a family. And just when you're thinking about safety first, it really does reorient your thinking around your priorities. And so I don't know if I have any unbelievable advice. I will say that I do embrace trade-offs. I make them pretty discussable, even with my 7-year-old when she's giving me maybe a hard time. I tell her it's, I might not be, well, I can't possibly do everything that's on my plate. I do the things that are most important. Right now, it is this work in Congress, the privilege to serve the people of the 3rd Congressional District in Massachusetts, and it's my family. And so to all my friends out there who haven't seen me in 3 years, I apologize. I miss you dearly, but I will see you again very soon. And look, I think that right now, making sure that we're really monitoring the mental health of those people around us. I know for me, it's very top of mind as a mother of 5, both with my older stepsons and with my 2 young girls. I mean, this has taken a huge toll on the quality of life and interactions with our children. But it's not just our kids. It's my mom and dad. It's my neighbors. I mean, so I think this is a time, and sometimes our political discourse can really derail the urge to just being kind first. But I would just say to everybody, be patient with others, listen more than anything else, and really try to put yourself in someone else's shoes, because we could use a whole lot more of that these days.
I think that's great advice and a great point to end on. So thank you so much for spending some time with us today, Congresswoman, and we wish you the best in Congress this year with all of your endeavors. A big thank you to our audience as well, and to Representative Trahan's staff, especially Ellie Takeman, who were also helpful in putting this event together today. Thank you as well to Alex Slatke at AAA for his technical expertise. For AAA Northeast, I'm Mary McGuire. Thank you again. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks so much, Congresswoman Trahan, for being with us.
You bet.